In this video, we are going to be solving a quadratic equation in 4 different ways. We are going to be solving by factoring, graphing, completing the square, and the quadratic formula. The equation that we're going to solve for this video is 0 equals x squared minus 4x minus 5. We're going to start with factoring. And something to note about factoring is that it does not always work. It is significantly the fastest method, but only if it works. So let's pull our equation up here. So we're going to start with 0 equals x squared minus 4x minus 5. We want to break this into two factors or two linear binomials. We know that this first space in each of our new factors, we want them to multiply to get x squared. So we know that this is going to be x times x. And then when we consider the two constants of our factors, we want them to multiply to get -5. And then we also want, when we distribute back, we want this loop, or x times the number, plus this loop, whatever number we put there, times x. We want those to combine to be -4x. Okay, so we're going to list possible factors of -5 to the side. And luckily 5 is prime, so there's only two options here, -1 times 5 or 1 times -5. If we want them to combine to be -4x, we're going to use this bottom one here, and we'll get -5 and +1. Let's double check those loops just in case. This top loop, x times 1, would be 1x, and the bottom loop, -5 times x, will be -5x. And if we were to combine those two, we would get the -4x that we wanted. Okay, now that we have our two factors, we are going to use the zero product property. Which says that if two things multiply to get 0, so if AB equals 0, then A equals 0 or B equals 0. So applying that to what we have, we're going to have x minus 5 equals 0 or x plus 1 equals 0. I'm going to add 5 to both sides, and I get my first solution is x equals 5. I'm going to subtract 1 to both sides, and I get my second solution is x equals -1. Right, the next method that we are going to apply will be solving by graphing. So I'm going to rewrite my equation over here. 0 equals x squared minus 4x minus 5. Now, I would suggest using my TI-84 calculator, or if you have access to Desmos, that's even better. But for the sake of this video, we're just going to go by hand. So I'm going to pretend that this 0 equals is a y equals and make a chart and try graphing. So for now, I'm going to just plug in -2 to +2 and see if we need to add more points to find the solutions here. So when I do that, I plug in -2 in for these x's here and here, and I get out 7. If I plug in -1, I get out 0. If I plug in 0, I get out -5. If I plug in 1, I get out -8. If I plug in 2, I get -9. Let's go ahead and graph these points, and then we'll decide if we need to find more points here. Again, really quick, this table can easily be found on the graphing calculator. Okay, so -2, 7 would be here. -1, 0. 0, -5 would be there. 1, -8. 2, -9. And we can see we have what looks like to be half of a quadratic curve. So I'm going to keep going with more points to the right. So I'm going to plug in 3 to start and see if I can get my full curve shape. So if I plug in 3 into the equation, I get -8. If I plug in 4, I get -5. If I plug in 5, I'm going to get 0, and then I'm running out of space. But if I plug in 6, I get 7. I'm going super fast because I'm looking at my table on my calculator, but if you did not have access to a TI-84, you would be plugging in for X right there and right there. Okay, so at 3, we are at -8. At 4, we are at -5. At 5, we are at 0. And at 6, we are at 7. So we can see our quadratic shape is finished out there. And back to the beginning, I put a y in place of that 0. And so we are looking for where y is equal to 0. And if we look at our table, it is here and here. And if we look at our graph, we can see those same two x-intercepts there and there. So my two solutions are x equals -1 and x equals +5, which we see those same solutions from the factoring portion. The next method that we're going to use is completing the square. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite the problem. Some teachers will teach you to move this -5 to the other side to start. I'm going to leave it, but you can also move it to start. So the first thing I'm going to do is group these first two terms, and then I'm going to rewrite this problem with some space in that group. So what that looks like is 0 equals x squared minus 4x with some space, and then -5 at the back. On this next line, I'm going to rewrite that, but instead of x squared minus 4x, I'm just going to write a parentheses squared. This is called completing the square. So we're trying to make that pink parentheses into a perfect square. So if this is scratch work, so I'm just going to use orange here, but off to the side, if I wanted a perfect square and I knew that I wanted x squared and minus 4x, I would want these two to be the same thing that would give me -4x, which would be -2x and -2x. So if I were to fill out the sides of this box here, I would need x times x, and then -2 and -2 to get those -2x's. So down here, I'm going to have x minus 2 squared. And the quick trick on this is to go from here to here, we are dividing this by 2. Okay, now to finish out or complete the square, we need to figure out what this last box is. And so we are going to we're going to fill in this box with -2 times -2, and we're going to end up with a +4. So right here, completing the square, I'll use orange, I guess you can see it better. We're going to be adding in a +4, and the trick on that is we're going to square whatever we had down there for the when we did our square on that side. So if you notice, I wrote that +4 in orange. You can't just randomly add 4 to an equation, so I'm also going to compensate for that by subtracting 4 as well. Okay, so that back number, we have -5 minus 4, so it's going to turn into a -9 at the back. Now we're still trying to solve for x, so I'm trying to get x by itself here, so I'm going to add 9 to both sides. And I get 9 equals parentheses x minus 2 squared. The next step I'm going to do is I'm going to square root both sides. And when I do that, I have to consider both positive and -3 when I square root 9. I need to add 2 to get x totally by itself. I ran out of space, but I'll go over here. I get 2 plus or minus 3 is equal to x. And we're going to have two solutions here. We're going to have 2 plus 3 equals x, and 2 minus 3 equals x. And so my two solutions are 5 equals x and -1 equals x. And we can see that we got the same answers that we did with factoring and graphing. Okay, the last method that we're going to use on this video is solving by the quadratic formula. The first thing that we need to do is write down what the quadratic formula is. It is something that you just memorized, but it is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down my equation. 0 equals x squared minus 4x minus 5. I need to label A, B, and C. So when we have a quadratic equation in standard form, A is with x squared, B is with x, and C is the constant at the back. I like to do this underneath part first so my work stays clean. This is called the discriminant. So I'm going to do b squared minus 4ac first. And for this, I'm going to be doing negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 5. I would strongly suggest using your calculator for this part so you don't mess up. So I am typing this in my calculator just to be sure I don't do any mental math wrong, and I get 36. And then now I'm highlighting in orange so you can see I'm going to take that 36 and put it under the square root. So we have x equals negative b will be positive 4 plus or minus the square root of 36, which we found above, all over 2 times a will be 2 times 1 or just 2. And then now we'll simplify from here. So we're going to have 4 plus or minus the square root of 36 is 6 over 2. 4 plus or minus 6 over 2. So we're going to have two answers, one with the plus sign, one with the minus sign. So we have x equals 4 plus 6 over 2. X equals 4 minus 6 over 2. So for this first one, I get 10 over 2, which is 5. And for the second one, I get negative 2 over 2, which is negative 1. And again, that matches what we've been getting on all the other sections. So we have solved 0 equals x squared minus 4x minus 5 4 different ways and gotten the same answer each time.